Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we have a beautiful little gold pocket watch. This thing is lovely. It came to me through a friend and mentor of mine. She asked me, hey, will you take a look at this watch? It's actually lived quite a life. It's been in her family for multiple generations, and it's got quite a story behind it. This watch is from the International Watch Company. It's now known as IWC more commonly. And this was actually acquired by her great-grandfather in 1929. He was on the Supreme Court for Hungary, but after having retired, he took a tour of Switzerland. And part of that tour was he got to see the factory of IWC in Schaffhausen. And when he was there, he told them, you know, I'm an astronomy aficionado, and that's kind of adjacent to timekeeping and that type of thing. And they were impressed by his knowledge and enthusiasm for this stuff. By the time he got to the end of the tour, which took almost all day, he was so impressed, in fact, that he said, I would like to buy a watch for my daughter from you. Now, at the time, IWC wasn't actively making watches, ladies' watches as they called them, because they felt that the smaller size wasn't conducive to great timekeeping. But they said, we do have a special watch. They've only made 3 of them is what they told him. One of them for Queen Mary of England, and the other 2 were still in the vault. And they gave him one of those watches, which he took home, and it's been in the family ever since. It got passed down to his son, then to his son after that, and then eventually to my friend. And so she has it, but interestingly, it's broken. As you can see, it is actually running, but it's missing the minutes hand right there. It's also missing the bezel and the crystal, and it doesn't quite feel right. Setting the setting lever here, this is how you set the hands. It does work, but it feels kind of weird, and winding the watch doesn't feel quite right. And I asked her, I said, what is there any more to the story here? And there actually is. There's a few things that happened to the watch. One of them was that her parents in the 70s had the watch recased. And that's actually a common thing to do for pocket watches. And wait a minute, is the bezel just stuck in the... Oh, it is. The bezel's actually still here, which is honestly a huge relief. I don't know where in the world I would have found another one of these, especially given the recasing. It is missing the crystal, as you can see, though. Let's see if it fits back on. Yeah, that looks fine. So, okay, so we still have the bezel. That's really good news because, as I was saying, this watch was recased. Now, that is fairly common. The cases will wear out. You'll take the movement in and they'll put it into a new case. But it can be a tricky process to do so, as you have to get a case that's exactly the right size for the watch, and you often have to make some modifications to the watch or the case to make it work. So that's something that we're going to have to keep an eye out for as well. Now, we can start by taking the movement out of this watch. And while I do, I want to tell you the rest of the story, which is that my friend had her daughter with her, and they went to the Antiques Roadshow, you know, the TV show, and they were going to take this watch in to try to get a story about it, try to get it appraised, try to see what the deal was with it, because they know it's a special watch. But it's, you know, this is generations of storytelling now within the family, and it can get kind of lost in translation about what this really is and what it was made for and all that. Well, while they were there, she was with her daughter, and her daughter, just before getting up to meet the person to get it appraised, kind of threw the watch in the air and meant to catch it, but didn't. And it fell on the ground, which rendered it non-working. Although, as you can see, the movement actually is ticking over now. So that's good news. But also meant that some parts went flying, and the minutes hand left the scene as well. So that's kind of how we have it in the condition now that it's in. And that was about, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago. So it is time to get this watch back and running. Let's see how it does on the time grapher. I assume badly. Yeah, badly, but actually not that bad. 200 degrees of amplitude, and it's losing about a minute a day. Honestly, kind of thought it might be worse than that. So that's not the worst, but like I said, it is time to get this watch back in service so that she can enjoy it. Look, this isn't going to be the type of thing that you carry around every day in any case, but having it properly running and looking good and, you know, so that she can pass it down through the generations and stuff and keep this watch's story alive, I think is really an awesome goal for us today. And that is what we're going to try to do. Now, there are multiple issues with the watch, particularly the missing hand. The bezel needs to be put back on, and then we need to make sure that it's just operating properly as well. So we've got our hands full today, but we're going to start by taking off the dial, which of course is made of enamel. It's a brass dial with enamel. You can see there's actually enamel on the back as well. It's just a thin layer, but that's there because enamel has to be heated to a very high temperature before it kind of melts, right? It turns into like a glass. It's a powder, but it turns into a glass at a certain temperature. The problem is that brass will actually curl up under that heat. So you have to put a layer of enamel on the back so that it stays flat. And that's what you saw there. I'm going to use my cannon pinion removal tool to remove the cannon pinion here. One of my favorite tools. I actually refurbished that as well off of eBay. It's kind of interesting. If you're into specialty tools, this is a very good hobby for you. They have a tool for everything, and they're all super cool. I'm going to start by taking off the balance. You can see that it's not shock protected. I'll explain that more if that doesn't mean anything to you. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you probably know what I'm referring to. But that also helps date the watch. Again, this one was acquired by her great-grandfather in 1929. Another way you can date it is you can see this has like almost a half or three-quarter plate on the top. Most watches that I work on are wristwatches, and they're not necessarily modern, but they're more modern than this. And it's more common to have two separate upper plates. This one just has one very large one, and this little bridge just for the escape wheel. You can also remove the pallet fork here. You can, if you ever wondered how they construct watches like this, like conceptually, you can think of it as sort of three layers, kind of like a hamburger or a sandwich or something, where the bottom layer is called the main plate. You can see it with the markings on it there. And that's an entire plate that's one part. And then on top of that goes all of the middle section, which are the wheels, the pinions, the gears, the springs, everything that goes in between that I'm taking out here. And then to kind of finish the job are usually multiple plates on the top. Again, this one has basically one very large one, but usually it's two and then like a balance bridge. So that's kind of how they conceptualize these. You can see this ratchet wheel, which is this big shiny wheel that I'm taking off here, is held on by 3 screws. That isn't normal for modern day watchmaking, but that's how it is on this one. And you can see the ratchet wheel, the crown wheel here is the same setup. These are very small screws. And we'll set those aside. Tiny little screws. I'm sure her great-grandfather got a chance to see some of the machines that made those little tiny screws. And I get asked that quite a bit, to the point that I finally just looked it up myself because I wasn't sure. I figured it would be some tiny little, hand machine where they're like got microscopes on it. It turns out it's a huge machine. Takes up like half a room. Okay, so now this very large upper plate can come free. And as you can see, it's actually grabbed a couple of pieces with it. There's the center wheel still in situ. So, when you see that, when it gets stuck, it often means that the oils or the lubricants that were last used to service this watch have kind of dried up or worn out. And that's likely what's happening here too, and why the watch isn't running super well. For her, it wasn't running at all. So we've already kind of made some progress just by, discovering that it actually is a functional timepiece currently, though with a lot of room for improvement. And yeah, that's a nice big plate there. This movement is made of brass as well. So are the wheels, except for the pivots. That's the kind of the axle. Those are made of steel. And I can remove whatever this part is. I don't actually know. Just want to make sure I remember which way it goes on. And then I can take the mainspring barrel out of the movement as well. And while I'm here, I can take the sliding clutch because I've already removed the crown and the stem. It's just kind of sitting there. Now I've got this little cover plate here on the other side that I need to remove, and more little tiny screws. These are very finicky as well. You can see that this movement has been serviced multiple times, which is probably why it's still here. Because if you just left this for too long, it probably wouldn't hold up very well. In fact, these screws don't have much bite to them. I got it a little bit up. I wonder if I can just sort of wedge it. Oh, there we go. All right. So now I can take this cover plate, which somehow looks like an angry cloud. It just looks really unhappy. I'm sorry, little guy, but you need a bath. And now we can take off these intermediate wheels. These are for setting the time. And that just leaves a few parts left here. The setting lever, the yoke, and the setting lever spring. That we'll start by taking off the setting lever. This one really is a lever. We still call that part that setting lever even on a modern watch, even though you don't actually, you're actually only interacting with the crown. This is a lever. Like you need to pull this little lever out to set the time. It's actually not that convenient. And that is the yoke there. You can see it's hardened steel. I'm just going to leave the spring in place here. These type of springs, they're not like, you don't have to clean them. I mean, they're going to get cleaned anyway, but they don't have to be cleaned individually. Okay, now we can take a look at the mainspring in this watch. This, of course, is what powers the whole watch. And this looks like an old school mainspring, one that hasn't been replaced in a very long time. You can tell because of the color. It's that deeper kind of purple brown almost color. And also because of the shape. The technology for these mainsprings has advanced quite a bit. You take a look at this one. It's just a circle pattern. But a modern mainspring actually looks more like almost like an S shape rather than a just concentric circle. Okay, on this case, I do want to take out the crown and stem, and there's just a little screw that kind of holds it in place, so I can just remove that here. This is for cleaning purposes, which is what we need to do next. So in order to clean this watch properly, we need to put every single part into these little mesh baskets, and then into a bigger mesh basket go the bigger parts, and then they need to go through the watch cleaning machine. And this is an extremely important step for servicing a watch. This is kind of the main thing that you actually do is clean and lubricate. So this absolutely has to happen. And as you can see, there's kind of a place for everything in this little basket. And then I can just take this basket. It attaches to an arm attached to an electric motor. And it's really simple. All it does is allow you to plunge this into a cleaning solution, of which there are 3, and then it oscillates back and forth. And that just agitates the parts with in the cleaning fluid and lets you completely clean the movement. So as this goes, I did want to remind you that I've got a Patreon for this channel. It is kind of the main way to support me if you like what I'm doing here, if you enjoy my videos. It's just me. You know, I don't have anybody. I do all the editing, I do all the shooting, I do everything. And I really try to put out the highest quality stuff I can for you. That's kind of my thing on this channel, is just to make the best possible video that I can and really explore this hobby with you and show you why these timepieces are so fascinating. And if you appreciate that and you like it, you can go to patreon.com/wristwatchrevival and you can support me there. Everybody who supports me gets a thank you card and a sticker from Wristwatch Revival in the mail. And I just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody who does. It really does mean the world to me. And take a look at the watch all cleaned up. Look at that beautiful movement. It cleaned up really nicely. And these things were definitely made to last. IWC makes a great watch. They still do, though they're kind of out of the pocket watch game, I think. Okay, so in order to put this spring back in, and I am going to reuse this spring, this keeps the watch more original. And for a timepiece that is not meant to be used daily or isn't going to be relied upon for, you know, fully accurate timekeeping for years to come or whatever, I much prefer to use the existing parts because, you know, this is going to be taken out and it's going to be enjoyed on occasion. But and I want it to run well, but I think having original parts going all the way back to when the watch was originally procured is a really cool extra thing that you can get here. And now I'm going to use my, speaking of special tools, this is the mainspring winders that will help me wind up the spring safely so that I don't damage it and I can put it back into the barrel that way. It also produces one of the best feelings in watchmaking, which is this. That right there. Oh my God. You can feel it and hear it. And then the spring is just beautifully nestled in there. It really does feel nice to have that happen. Now I can replace the arbor and make sure that it's all locked into place before using just a little bit of medium viscosity oil here before we button up the mainspring. It is truly amazing that twisted up piece of metal is the only thing that provides power to the watch. I mean, you have to wind it, of course, but once it's going, that's it. That little strip of metal is what this whole entire mechanism is based on. And it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of people think of a watch like you wind it up and then the power goes through and then it runs the watch. That is technically true, but a better way to think about how a watch actually works is that you wind up something like that mainspring, and then the whole job of the watch is to allow that mainspring to unwind in very specific increments that as consistently as possible. That's really what's happening. It's not quite the same thing like an engine or, a car engine or something where like you put in fuel so that it can do the thing. It is the thing. It's just you are trying to the engineers that made these watches are trying their absolute best to control that rate of unwinding as accurately as possible. You can see the train of wheels here, the bridge, then the center wheel, third wheel, and fourth wheel all lined up in a nice row. I have to say that the design of this pocket watch is not only functional, but it's also just aesthetically very pleasing. Okay, now I mentioned this before, but there's a little sandwich action happening here. And so I'm just going to use a piece of Rodico. That's that kind of bluish green. It's like silly putty. It's a lot like silly putty, actually. It's like just a little drier. And it is a very handy tool to have around your workbench if you're getting into the hobby, because you can use it like this just to help you hold something. You can also use it to clean, like just a little smudge or something like that. It's just really handy to have to hold parts or to clean stuff up. Now I need to screw in these little tiny screws, and I need to get it lined up with where that Rodico is holding it up, but it looks like mission accomplished there. And now I can go about putting this plate on, though it is a little bit tricky because it has multiple pivot holes to line up. Let's see how lucky we got here. Okay, so far so good. Wow. First shot. Boy, they really do know how to make these things right. I mean, that just fell right into place. It almost felt like I couldn't miss. I have to say, working on pocket watches, even a smaller size one like this is really nice after you work on a bunch of wristwatches, which are much smaller and much more finicky. I always recommend that if you're looking to get into this hobby, which by the way, I highly recommend you do. It is a very rewarding an interesting hobby to get into, especially if you like rebuilding stuff. If you're into cars, I guarantee you'll like this. This is like working on cars, just a little mini version. But I always, what is this, by the way? Ugh. Yeah. So weird. The ratchet wheel just has this staining on it. And what I assume, it actually looks like that is a fingerprint. It's interesting because, you can see I'm wearing finger cots here, and generally you don't want to handle the movement once it's cleaned with your bare hands when possible. And I'm just going to use some polish and a stick here to try to just clean this up, because that doesn't look very good. And, especially for a family heirloom, you're going to be able to open up the back of this watch and take a look at that movement. And I want this to look a little better. I wonder if I can improve it. This is actually a rare example of where somebody didn't use a glove or a finger cot over their fingers, and it looks like they got their fingers on it, and it actually corroded a little bit the outside. Let's see how much improvement. Oh, much better. We'd have to remachine it to make it perfect, but that's a huge improvement. And I'm glad I took the time to do it. Interesting though, you don't often see the results of somebody's fingers. You've got oils on your fingers that actually can cause corrosion over the long term on parts like this. And I think that's what we had here. Anyway, what I was saying before is if you are interested in starting the hobby, I always recommend starting with a pocket watch. They're easier to take apart. They're easier to put back together. They're easier to see what's going on so that you can kind of engineer it with your head, right? You can go, okay, if I move this, this moves this over. On a wristwatch, it's often too small to see. This, again, is not a full-size pocket watch, which is what I would recommend. But if you go on eBay, you can find American pocket watches, you know, from the 1800s, early 1900s that are just a movement, no case, for very, very cheap. You know, 40, 50 bucks, you can get one. They usually don't work. But if you're just looking to practice, that's a great place to start. Okay, now we can put the escape wheel in place. And again, it has its own little mini bridge here that we need to put on. Just got to make sure that the pivots are lined up before we tighten anything down. There's always a safety concern. I don't mean safety to me or to you, but I do mean for the watch. You know, you don't want to go breaking parts on something like this that I'm assuming I could at some point track something down, but I mean, it might require contacting IWC directly. It might require manufacturing a part, like stuff that's a little above my, my level. Okay, now we can go ahead and start reassembling the keyless works now that we've got the top all put together. I call it the top, but it's actually the bottom of the watch. Just not from a watchmaker's perspective, because that's the part you're working on all the time. But this part we're looking at here is actually the dial side. The dial will mount directly onto this side of it. Okay, now we can put these intermediate wheels in after lubricating the posts that they go on. One more little bit of lubrication. See, there's a jewel there that is going to be covered up. And you can see there's actually a tooth missing here from this part as well. That will make winding the watch or setting the hands perhaps a little bit difficult, but I don't know how to get a new part for this one, so we are going to have to just see if we can make it work. Again, if this was a wristwatch that was going to be used every day, we would have to try to figure something out there. But since this is a family heirloom type piece that's, you know, mostly not going to be used for timekeeping, we hopefully can get away with it. A little bit of the blue grease that I like to use for the posts here. And a little bit of it in the middle of the sliding clutch as well. This is where it's going to get contacted by this part right here, the yoke. Looks like the yoke may have been repaired at some point. You can see some discoloration there from heat treating it, or maybe a weld or something like that. Okay, careful. Let's get the setting lever in place. Hopefully that'll kind of hold everything together so nothing goes flying off. This is a shouldered screw. That way the setting lever can rotate on it. You know, a normal screw, you would just screw down and then it would just hold whatever was under it pinned down tight. But this one actually has a shoulder on it so that you can move the setting lever even after that screw has been put into place. Okay, everything looks good there. Now we can put in the crown and the stem. We, of course, need a little bit of this blue grease on here. Just because this is metal on metal and it can create wear or metal shavings if not properly lubricated. And here's our angry cloud. He has to go back to his home here. Does not look happy about it. And then there's these little tiny screws once again. And one little bit of lubrication there on the setting lever, and that means we can flip the movement back over and reinstall the pallet fork. Now, This puts us kind of on the home stretch as far as the movement itself goes. It was running, but we're hoping that it'll run a little bit better. Okay. Pallet fork bridge now in place as well after a quick test. You can see I'm using the stick as kind of a second hand here to hold that part down so that I can screw down the pallet fork. I don't want it to shift, right? When when you're using a screwdriver, sometimes if you apply pressure, it can shift around and then it can dislodge the pivot, which is definitely not where you want to be. All right, so now it's time for a test. I'm going to put on the balance here, and we're going to see if we can make this run. Now, this movement has almost no lubrication on the train of wheels. Oh, it's almost going. Come on. What's going on here? Okay. Maybe a little bit of air to encourage it. Oh, it just doesn't. It looks like it's not quite seated correctly. I think what we can try to do, it's seated, it's aligned. It just looks like it's rubbing against something. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and screw down the balance. This sometimes aligns the pivots better and will give us perhaps a better idea of if it'll go. I'll just give it a little kickstart. Ooh, there we go. That is what I like to see. Now we have a running movement. It actually looks like it's running pretty well, but of course we are not done with that yet. No, we still have to do quite a bit here, especially on a movement like this. So we need to lubricate the jewels. And we'll start off with the actually the bottom of the balance jewels here. This one's fairly straightforward. It's held on by a small screw and it has what we call a cap jewel. And the cap jewel is just a flat jewel with no hole in it that goes over a jewel with a hole in it. And it allows you to suspend the oil there and also make sure that the oil doesn't go anywhere. So it makes it last longer and allows you to use a little bit more than you might normally be able to. So if I suspend just a little droplet of oil here right on this cap jewel, I can carefully pick it up, place it back over the hole jewel, just like that. And then I can use this, this comically small screw once again. I have to be very careful with this. And now I can secure that to the bottom. And again, the balance wheel, it's big by watch standards, right? And it has a rim that is actually designed to keep the weight on the outside so that it spins more consistently or it oscillates more consistently. But having all the weight on the outside of a wheel, which by the way is what I'm taking off here, you can see how there's those weights on the outside of that wheel that's dangling. That does mean it puts a lot of pressure on its pivot, which is like its axle. And so you need extra oil there. So what we have to do, because this particular movement does not have a shock protection system, which is what I mentioned when we were taking it apart, it means we have to completely disassemble the balance, which, well, it's a pain. It really is. Like, this is very finicky work. It is difficult. It is tricky. And it is so much more than a modern movement with shock protection system, because those are designed so that you can simply put the shock protection system, which is just like a tiny brass spring, out of the way and then service the jewels and then replace them. But here it doesn't work like that. You actually have to disassemble the whole thing. Whoop. Oh God. I dropped one of the smallest screws of the whole movement. Please be here. Oh, there it is. Thank goodness. Look how, yeah, you can see them at the top of the screen. They are so tiny. And as you can see, the balance itself comes apart in 3 different parts here. There's a regulating arm. There's the cap jewel right there. And then there's the balance arm itself. And so to clean these, I'm going to kind of do it by hand, and I'm going to put them in a solution called One Dip. It's a solvent, so it'll help dissolve and clean any surfaces really that it comes into contact with. It's kind of a harsh chemical, but it's worth it here to get any of the dried on oil or debris that may have been left on these parts off of them because we need them to be very, very clean before we reassemble them fully with the lubricant as well. I'm also going to put the balance wheel itself with its balance spring in there, and you can see it there. The spring is coiled up quite nicely. And once again, Rodico to the rescue. We're going to take Rodico here, and I'm going to kind of create a little platform. So on that platform, I'm going to place this, which is the cap jewel that I mentioned before. Now I can put, now that it's sitting here and on the Rodico, I can put a little droplet of oil right in the middle. Has to be suspended on the middle. Then I can take this regulation arm and kind of loosely place it around the cap jewel setting, which is where it'll be anyway. And then I can take the entire arm of the balance bridge itself, and I can line up the screw holes and the jewel hole with ideally minimal fuss, because if you slide it around, it'll displace the oil and you won't have a properly oiled watch anymore. So you just kind of want to use as few movements as possible when possible. And then I can replace these tiny screws. This is the smallest screwdriver I have. And now I can secure it. It is wild how small these parts are. But as you can see, if you're careful, they don't go flying away, and you can very gently screw them down. Okay, so with that done, now I've got that part back together, but I still have to put the balance wheel back in place as well. It's held on by a stud that is screwed together with friction to hold it in place. And I have to align the stud and get really close to this thing with my loop. I do most of the work on this channel without a loop, which is kind of a no-no. You're really supposed to, but since I'm filming, it's very difficult to, like, you can't just go sticking your head in the camera frame every other second, you know, because I want to show you what I'm doing. I'm bringing you along for the ride, right? And yeah, so a few more jewels to oil here on the movement itself after having finished those cap jewels and gotten it all finished up. And now we can put it back on the time grapher and let's see how it does. Ooh, much better amplitude straight off the bat, 300 degrees. And now it's within 5 seconds a day. The beat error says 9.9, but I kind of don't believe it. Those lines are very close together, which mean that generally the beat error isn't very high and it doesn't have any problems starting. So I'm a little confused about that, but the watch is running well and I'm really happy with it. Now we have to turn our attention though to the other issues that we faced, which is one of them is that the crystal's missing. So I'm going to replace the crystal on this watch. It goes right into that bezel that we found kind of wedged into the outside part of the case. And as you can see, I've got a very flat, thin bezel here. And I just need to line it up with the die that's going to go on the top for my press tool. And this one looks like the right size. And then I can just line up the bezel down on the bottom. But it doesn't want to seem to go in. Why not? Something's... Oh, no. Take a look at it on the microscope. That is... Oh, that is the prior crystal. Actually, it looks like it was glass. And there's still chunks of it in the rim of this bezel. In addition to it, it was glued into place, which is what you need to do on some of these. Sometimes not. And that glue is very stubborn. I wonder if I can just break out these pieces. No, they don't want to come out. See, and until I get these out of here, that lip won't accept the new crystal. So that is not going to work. Oh, what a mess. Yeah, this glue is just too stubborn. It's old and it's glue. So I guess it's kind of doing its job. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try something that I've read about online. I'm going to use acetone, otherwise known as fingernail polish remover. And I'm going to soak this bezel in it overnight. If they used like a version of super glue, this should help soften it. And let's see how it did. Oh, that's much better. Oh, that actually worked. Sweet. You can see there's still chunks of glass, but look how much easier this comes out of the bezel now that it's been kind of softened up by the acetone. That worked really well. And this is also strangely satisfying to peel this out of here. Get out. There we go. Look at that. Yeah, you can see how much more pliable, and you can see the pieces of glass still stuck in there as well. So that never would have worked unless we softened it up. So there's a good trick. I'll write that one down and keep it in my mind if I ever get stuck with this type of glue again. It looks like it's pretty easy to take out. And just, yeah, a quick check with the tweezers, and it's nice and smooth in there now. So now, let's try this again. Once again, I should be able to mount up this crystal and get this crystal replaced on here. So let's see how it does. Again, super thin crystal. You have to be very careful because if you overdo it here, it'll just crack. I mean, you can snap it with your fingers, no problem. That isn't true for the regular crystals. They're actually quite durable, but a crystal like this is meant to be covered by a pocket watch case, so it's really just for display purposes. And there we go. It looks much, much better. Now, we've got more though. So we have to deal with this hand situation. If you've ever seen what the hands actually go on, it is this part right here and this part right here. That's what the hands actually mount up to. Now, normally there's a dial in between, but you can actually mount them here without it. So I'm going to put the hour hands on, and as you can see, it goes on the hour wheel there. It looks kind of funny without it, but that little knob at the top, that is where the minutes hand that is missing will go. And we need to figure out the size of these hands. So I'm going to measure it, that top, just that upper topmost part of the cannon pinion. That's where the minutes hand goes. It looks like it's 0.72 or probably 0.7 millimeter in diameter. And I also need to get a rough length on the hand. So I'm going to measure the hour hand. It's looks like 9.6 millimeters, so 9.5 probably. And I need the minutes hand to be a little longer. The other thing I can do here is use this gauge, because if you've ever wanted to know the size, you can actually just measure it directly using this gauge. And as you can see, it'll show us right there, it's 115. So 1.15 millimeters is the diameter of that gauge. And we can also check it to kind of see what this thing says. I'm just curious. Yeah, 1.18, so close enough. All right, so now I can put on the dial, because that needs to go on regardless. And it's held on by these dial feet here. And I found some hands. Now, these are not the same style of hands. I could not find some that were exact replacements. These are, measured to size hands. But let's see how they look. They are the correct size for the post that we have here. That, of course, would be the new hour hand going into place there. And it doesn't look too bad. We can also, of course, keep our eye out for replacement hands on eBay that were period specific, but I was unable to find them, at least at this time. So let's see if this minute hand will also go on. These are very simple styled hands, but they're gold and they'll match the case quite well. And let's see how they do. Yeah, looks good. Not too bad. I'm going to reuse the original seconds hand. And of course, I will also send back the hour hand that we did keep to the owner so that in case we can ever find another minutes hand that we like, we can use it. Okay, and with the new hands in place, I think they look pretty good actually. We can put the movement back into the case. And of course, the crown and stem also need to be secured. Hey, this thing's starting to look pretty good. Can use an air blower here to make sure there's no dust before replacing the bezel. It has to all be kind of aligned properly. And we also have to make sure that the hands don't touch that crystal that we've got. But no, it looks really good actually. Take a look at that. Hey, that's looking really, really nice. And we can even take a look at the inside of the back. I do need to also secure the movement using the movement screws here to the back. That will just make sure that the movement doesn't slip around inside of the case or, develop some type of a weird gap or knock. And we'll just secure that down. And that's it. Take a look at this beautiful little pocket watch. I am really happy with how this thing came out. This is an important family heirloom, right? These are the types of things that you just can't replace. And now we've got it back in action and looking great. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. I did want to say, by the way, I do have an Instagram for this channel. It's wristwatch_revival, and you can always say hi to me over there if you'd like. With that said, I just wanted to say thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time.